On a chilly winter evening in 1888, a lone figure stumbled upon a gruesome scene in London's Whitechapel district, the mutilated body of Mary Jane Kelly, the fifth and final victim of the infamous serial killer, Jack the Ripper. This brutal murder marked the end of a terrifying reign that had gripped the city for months, leaving behind a trail of bloodshed and unanswered questions. But what drove this killer to commit such heinous crimes, and why did the case remain unsolved for so long? The streets of Whitechapel were a labyrinth of poverty, crime, and corruption, where the downtrodden and the desperate struggled to survive. It was here that the darkest aspects of human nature emerged, and the boundaries between good and evil were constantly blurred. As we delve into the secret history of crime, it becomes clear that the Jack the Ripper case was not an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of a larger disease that had been festering in the underbelly of society for centuries. The lack of effective law enforcement, coupled with the social and economic conditions of the time, created a perfect storm that allowed crime to thrive. But that wasn't the strangest part. Despite the numerous investigations and tips, the killer was never caught, and the case remains one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in history. Theories abound, from the involvement of royalty to the existence of a larger conspiracy, but the truth behind the Ripper's identity and motivations remains shrouded in mystery. As we navigate the complex web of clues and contradictions, we begin to realize that the truth is far more complex and intriguing than we ever imagined. The more we examine the case, the more we uncover a trail of contradictions and inconsistencies that raise more questions than answers. The killer's modus operandi, for instance, was unlike anything seen before. The meticulous planning, the calculated brutality, and the apparent lack of motive all point to a level of sophistication that was rare in those times. But what's even more intriguing is the fact that the killer seemed to be always one step ahead of the law, leaving behind a series of cryptic clues and messages that have been interpreted in countless ways over the years. The most famous of these is the From Hell letter, which was sent to the police and contained a piece of human kidney, allegedly from one of the victims. But was this a genuine clue, or just a clever ruse to throw the investigators off the scent? As we dig deeper, we begin to uncover a hidden world of crime and deception that threatens to upend everything we thought we knew about the case. As we explore the darker corners of the Jack the Ripper case, we start to notice a disturbing pattern of corruption and cover-up that reaches the highest echelons of power. The police investigation was marred by incompetence and bias, with many leads and suspects being ignored or dismissed outright. But what's even more shocking is the fact that many of the key players in the case, including the police commissioner and the pathologist, had secrets to hide and motives to obscure the truth. The case was a perfect example of how the powerful and the privileged could manipulate the system to their advantage, leaving the vulnerable and the marginalized to suffer the consequences. But that's not the only twist. As we follow the money trail and the web of connections between the suspects and the victims, we start to uncover a complex network of crime and corruption that goes far beyond the confines of the Ripper case. The further we delve into the secret history of crime, the more we realize that the Jack the Ripper case was just the tip of the iceberg, a symptom of a much larger disease that had been festering in the shadows for centuries. The streets of Whitechapel were a microcosm of the social and economic ills that plagued the entire city, from poverty and exploitation to racism and xenophobia. The case was a stark reminder of the darker aspects of human nature and the ways in which the powerful and the privileged could exploit and manipulate the vulnerable. But as we examine the case in more detail, we start to notice a series of strange coincidences and connections that link the Ripper case to other infamous crimes of the time. The fact that the killer seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind no discernible trail or motive, is just one of the many mysteries that surround the case. But what if the killer didn't act alone? And what if the case was just one part of a much larger conspiracy? As we explore these questions, we start to uncover a hidden world of crime and deception that threatens to upend everything we thought we knew about the case. As we continue to investigate the Jack the Ripper case, we start to notice a series of inconsistencies and contradictions that raise more questions than answers. The fact that the killer seemed to be able to move undetected through the streets of Whitechapel, despite the presence of numerous witnesses and suspects, is just one of the many mysteries that surround the case. But what's even more intriguing is the fact that many of the key players in the case, including the police and the suspects, seem to be hiding secrets and motives of their own. The case was a perfect example of how the truth can be distorted and manipulated to serve the interests of the powerful and the privileged. But that's not the only twist. As we follow the trail of clues and connections, we start to uncover a complex web of crime and corruption that goes far beyond the confines of the Ripper case. The fact that the case remains unsolved to this day is a stark reminder of the darker aspects of human nature and the ways in which the truth can be hidden and distorted to serve the interests of the powerful. The Jack the Ripper case is a stark reminder of the dangers of complacency and the importance of seeking the truth, no matter how difficult or complex it may be. As we continue to investigate the case, we start to realize that the truth is far more nuanced and multifaceted than we ever imagined. The case was a perfect example of how the powerful and the privileged can manipulate the system to their advantage, leaving the vulnerable and the marginalized to suffer the consequences. But as we explore the case in more detail, we start to notice a series of strange coincidences and connections that link the Ripper case to other infamous crimes of the time. The fact that the killer seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind no discernible trail or motive, is just one of the many mysteries that surround the case. But what if the killer didn't act alone? And what if the case was just one part of a much larger conspiracy? As we explore these questions, we start to uncover a hidden world of crime and deception that threatens to upend everything we thought we knew about the case. As we delve deeper into the secret history of crime, we start to realize that the Jack the Ripper case was just one part of a much larger narrative, a narrative that spans centuries and continents, and involves some of the most powerful and influential figures in history. The case was a perfect example of how the truth can be distorted and manipulated to serve the interests of the powerful and the privileged. But as we follow the trail of clues and connections, we start to uncover a complex web of crime and corruption that goes far beyond the confines of the Ripper case. The fact that the case remains unsolved to this day is a stark reminder of the dangers of complacency and the importance of seeking the truth, no matter how difficult or complex it may be. As we continue to investigate the case, we start to notice a series of inconsistencies and contradictions that raise more questions than answers. But that's not the only twist. As we explore the case in more detail, we start to uncover a hidden world of crime and deception that threatens to upend everything we thought we knew about the case. The secret history of crime is a complex and multifaceted narrative that involves some of the most powerful and influential figures in history. The Jack the Ripper case was just one part of this narrative, a narrative that spans centuries and continents, and involves some of the most infamous crimes in history. As we delve deeper into the case, we start to realize that the truth is far more nuanced and multifaceted than we ever imagined. The case was a perfect example of how the powerful and the privileged can manipulate the system to their advantage, leaving the vulnerable and the marginalized to suffer the consequences. But as we explore the case in more detail, we start to notice a series of strange coincidences and connections that link the Ripper case to other infamous crimes of the time. The fact that the killer seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind no discernible trail or motive, is just one of the many mysteries that surround the case. But what if the killer didn't act alone, and what if the case was just one part of a much larger conspiracy? As we explore these questions, we start to uncover a hidden world of crime and deception that threatens to upend everything we thought we knew about the case. As we continue to investigate the Jack the Ripper case, we start to realize that the truth is far more complex and intriguing than we ever imagined. The case was a perfect example of how the powerful and the privileged can manipulate the system to their advantage, leaving the vulnerable and the marginalized to suffer the consequences. But as we follow the trail of clues and connections, we start to uncover a complex web of crime and corruption that goes far beyond the confines of the Ripper case. The fact that the case remains unsolved to this day is a stark reminder of the complexities and challenges faced by law enforcement in the late 19th century. As we delve deeper into the history of crime, it becomes clear that the Jack the Ripper case was not an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of a larger problem. The streets of Whitechapel were a hotbed of poverty, prostitution, and violence, with a largely immigrant population living in squalid conditions. It was a perfect storm of social and economic factors that created a fertile ground for crime to flourish. But what's even more intriguing is that the Ripper case was not the only series of brutal murders to take place in London during this time period. There were other, lesser-known cases of serial killings that occurred in the years leading up to and following the Ripper murders, which have been largely overlooked by historians. One such case is that of the Torso Killer, who terrorized London in the late 1880, murdering and dismembering several women, with some of the victims' bodies being found in the same areas where the Ripper struck. The similarities between the two cases are striking, with both killers targeting vulnerable women and using similar methods of mutilation. But despite the connections, the Torso Killer was never caught, and the case remains a mystery to this day. But that wasn't the strangest part. As investigators looked closer at the Torso Killer case, they began to notice a pattern of similarities with other serial killings that took place in Europe during the same time period. It seemed that there was a larger network of killers operating across the continent with possible connections to each other. The question on everyone's mind was, could these cases be linked? And if so, what did it mean for our understanding of the history of crime? As we continue to follow the trail of clues, we find ourselves in the midst of a heated debate among historians and criminologists about the nature of serial killing. Some argue that it is a uniquely modern phenomenon, born out of the social and economic upheavals of the Industrial Revolution. Others claim that serial killing has been a part of human history for centuries, with examples of mass murder and mutilation found in ancient cultures. But what is clear is that the late 19th century saw a significant increase in reported cases of serial killing, with many of these cases remaining unsolved to this day. The lack of forensic technology and the limited understanding of psychology at the time made it difficult for law enforcement to track down and apprehend these killers. But that didn't stop them from trying, and in some cases, they came close to catching their man. The case of H. Holmes, a notorious American serial killer who operated in Chicago during the 1890s, is a prime example of how detectives used innovative techniques to track down a killer. Holmes, whose real name was Herman Webster Mudgett, was a charismatic and cunning individual who used his charm and good looks to lure victims into his Murder Castle, a hotel he built in Chicago specifically for the purpose of killing. The hotel was equipped with secret rooms, hidden passages, and trapdoors, making it the perfect place for Holmes to carry out his nefarious activities. But despite his cleverness, Holmes was eventually caught and confessed to 27 murders, although some estimates put the number of victims at over 200. His case is significant not only because of the sheer number of victims, but also because it highlights the growing awareness of serial killing as a distinct type of crime. The public was fascinated by the case, and it sparked a wave of interest in true crime stories, with many newspapers and magazines publishing sensationalized accounts of the murders. But as the public's fascination with serial killing grew, so did the concern about the potential for copycat crimes. The fear of copycat killings was very real, and law enforcement agencies began to take notice of the potential for serial killers to inspire others to commit similar crimes. The concept of the serial killer, as we understand it today, was still in its infancy, but it was clear that these individuals were not just random murderers, but rather calculated and deliberate in their actions. The idea that someone could be motivated to kill multiple people, often with a twisted sense of purpose or ideology, was both terrifying and fascinating. As the 20th century dawned, the world was about to witness some of the most infamous serial killers in history, with names like Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, and David Berkowitz becoming synonymous with evil. But what's often overlooked is that these killers did not operate in a vacuum, and their actions were often influenced by the social and cultural context in which they lived. The 1960s and 1970s, in particular, saw a surge in serial killings, with many of these cases being linked to the counterculture movement and the social upheavals of the time. The connection between serial killing and the counterculture movement is a complex one, with some arguing that the relaxed social norms and the emphasis on individual freedom created an environment in which serial killers could thrive. Others point to the fact that many serial killers were motivated by a desire for control and power, which was often linked to the patriarchal and misogynistic attitudes of the time. Whatever the reasons, it's clear that the 1960s and 1970 saw a significant increase in reported cases of serial killing, with many of these cases remaining unsolved to this day. The investigation into these crimes was often hampered by a lack of resources and a limited understanding of the psychology of serial killers. But despite these challenges, detectives and criminologists continued to push the boundaries of what was known about serial killing, using innovative techniques and new technologies to track down and apprehend these killers. And it's here, at the intersection of psychology, sociology, and technology, that we find ourselves on the cusp of a major breakthrough in our understanding of the secret history of crime. But that's a story for another time, as we continue to follow the trail of clues and connections that will lead us deeper into the heart of darkness. As we delve deeper into the secret history of crime, it becomes increasingly clear that the most significant breakthroughs often arise from the most unexpected places. The advent of forensic psychology, for instance, has allowed us to peer into the minds of perpetrators, to understand the motivations and impulses that drive them to commit heinous acts. Yet, despite these advances, we're still grappling with the fundamental question of what makes a criminal. Is it nature or nurture, a product of environment and upbringing, or an innate predisposition towards violence and antisocial behavior? The answer, much like the criminals themselves, remains elusive, always seeming to slip through our fingers just when we think we've got a grasp on it. But that's what makes the work of researchers like Dr. Robert Hare so fascinating. His development of the psychopathy checklist, a tool used to assess the presence and severity of psychopathic tendencies in individuals, has been a game changer in the field. By identifying key traits such as lack of empathy, impulsivity, and manipulative behavior, law enforcement and mental health professionals can better predict and prepare for the actions of potential perpetrators. And yet, even with these advancements, we're still faced with the disturbing reality that many psychopaths are able to evade detection, blending seamlessly into society, hiding in plain sight. It's a chilling thought, one that raises more questions than answers, particularly when we consider the fact that psychopaths are estimated to make up only about 1% of the general population, yet are responsible for a disproportionate amount of crime. The complexity of this issue is further compounded by the role of technology, which has simultaneously enabled and hindered our efforts to combat crime. On the one hand, advances in digital forensics have allowed us to track and analyze the online activities of perpetrators, to identify patterns and connections that might have otherwise gone undetected. But on the other hand, the very same technologies have also created new avenues for criminal activity, from cybercrime and identity theft to the spread of misinformation and propaganda. It's a cat-and-mouse game, with law enforcement and criminals engaging in a constant cycle of escalation, each side adapting and evolving in response to the other's moves. And it's here, in this gray area, that we find some of the most intriguing and unsettling examples of the secret history of crime, where the lines between right and wrong are blurred, and the truth is often obscured by a tangled web of deceit and misdirection. One such example is the case of the poisonous lady, a woman who, in the early 20th century, was accused of murdering multiple husbands and suitors, using a combination of poison and manipulation to get what she wanted. Her story is a fascinating, if disturbing, illustration of the psychopathic mind at work, and the ways in which individuals with these tendencies are able to exploit and manipulate others for their own gain. But that wasn't the strangest part. As investigators delved deeper into her past, they began to uncover a trail of clues suggesting that she may have been linked to a wider network of similar individuals, all of whom shared a common bond, a willingness to do whatever it took to achieve their goals, no matter the cost in human life. It's a chilling prospect, one that raises questions about the nature of evil itself, and whether it's possible for individuals to be born with a predisposition towards violence and destruction. As we continue to follow the trail of clues and connections, we begin to uncover a complex web of relationships and events that span decades, even centuries. We see how historical events, such as wars and economic downturns, can create fertile ground for crime to flourish, and how the actions of individuals can have far-reaching consequences, rippling out to affect countless lives. It's a sobering reminder of the interconnectedness of human experience, and the ways in which our individual actions can contribute to a larger landscape of crime and violence. And yet, even in the face of such complexity, there are those who would seek to simplify the issue, to reduce it to a single factor or cause. But the truth is far more nuanced, far more multifaceted, and it's only by embracing this complexity that we can hope to truly understand the secret history of crime. The work of criminologists like Emil Durkheim, who sought to understand the social and cultural factors that contribute to crime, is particularly relevant here. His concept of anomie, or the breakdown of social norms and values, helps to explain why certain individuals or groups may be more prone to criminal behavior. And yet, even Durkheim's theories are not without their limitations, as they fail to account for the role of individual agency and personal responsibility. It's a classic debate, one that has been raging for centuries. Do we blame the individual, or do we blame society? The answer, of course, is not so simple, and it's only by considering both perspectives that we can begin to grasp the full scope of the issue. But that's what makes the study of crime so fascinating: the endless paradoxes, the contradictions, the gray areas that refuse to be reduced to simple explanations or solutions. As we dig deeper, we begin to uncover a hidden world of secret societies and underground networks, all operating in the shadows, beyond the reach of law enforcement. It's a world of codes and cryptic messages, of hidden symbols and clandestine meetings. And at the heart of it all, we find the figure of the mastermind, the individual who pulls the strings, who orchestrates the crimes, and who always seems to stay one step ahead of the law. It's a tantalizing prospect, one that has captured the imagination of the public and inspired countless works of fiction. But the truth is far more complex, far more nuanced, and it's only by peeling back the layers of myth and legend that we can begin to glimpse the reality that lies beneath. And it's here, in this hidden world, that we find some of the most surprising and disturbing revelations of all, revelations that challenge our assumptions and force us to confront the darkness that lurks within us all. The case of the Zodiac Killer, who terrorized the San Francisco Bay Area in the late 1960s and early 1970s, is a prime example of this. His cryptic letters and codes, sent to the police and newspapers, were a hallmark of his crimes and continue to fascinate and frustrate investigators to this day. But what's particularly interesting about this case is the way in which the killer seemed to toy with the authorities, always staying one step ahead and leaving a trail of clues that seemed to lead nowhere. It's a classic example of the cat-and-mouse game that we see played out between law enforcement and criminals, and it raises important questions about the psychology of the perpetrator and the motivations that drove him to commit such heinous crimes. And yet, despite the many investigations and the countless hours of research, the case remains unsolved, a haunting reminder of the limitations of our knowledge and the enduring power of the secret history of crime. As we continue to explore this complex and often disturbing world, we begin to realize that the secret history of crime is not just about the crimes themselves, but about the people who commit them and the societies that enable and condone their actions. It's a story of human nature in all its complexity, and it's a story that challenges our assumptions and forces us to confront the darkness that lurks within us all. And it's here, in this darkest of places, that we find the most surprising and the most profound revelations of all, revelations that have the power to transform our understanding of the world and our place within it. But that's a story for another time, as we continue to follow the trail of clues and delve deeper into the heart of darkness, where the secrets of the past wait to be uncovered. As we venture further into the underbelly of crime, we find ourselves entangled in a web of intricate relationships between law enforcement, organized crime, and the political establishment. One of the most striking examples of this complex interplay can be seen in the notorious case of Whitey Bulger, the infamous Boston crime boss who managed to evade capture for over 2 decades, despite being one of the most wanted men in America. But what's most surprising about Bulger's case is that he was, in fact, an FBI informant, providing intelligence on his own crime family to the very agency tasked with bringing him to justice. This begs the question, how could someone so deeply embroiled in organized crime be allowed to operate with relative impunity? And what does this say about the blurred lines between law enforcement and the underworld? The answer lies in the murky world of informant politics, where the pursuit of convictions and the desire for intelligence can sometimes lead to Faustian bargains. In Bulger's case, his handler, FBI agent John Connolly, had developed a close relationship with the crime boss and had become deeply invested in the intelligence he was providing. But as the years went by, it became increasingly clear that Bulger was using his status as an informant to further his own interests and to eliminate his rivals. And yet, despite mounting evidence of his wrongdoing, Bulger remained a valued asset to the FBI and was allowed to continue operating with relative freedom. But that wasn't the strangest part. As we delve deeper into the case, we find that Bulger's relationship with the FBI was just one part of a much larger tapestry, involving corruption, deceit, and even murder. The more we learn about the inner workings of organized crime, the more we realize that the lines between good and evil are often blurred. Take, for example, the case of Mayor Lansky, the notorious Jewish mobster who rose to prominence during the Prohibition era. Lansky was a ruthless and cunning operator who built a vast empire of crime and corruption, and yet he was also a devoted family man and a loyal friend to those he trusted. This dichotomy is at the heart of the crime world, where individuals are often driven by a complex mix of motivations, including greed, power, and loyalty. And it's this complexity that makes it so difficult to categorize individuals as simply good or evil. But as we continue to explore the secret history of crime, we begin to uncover a pattern of behavior that suggests something far more sinister at play. The pivotal moment in our investigation comes when we examine the role of government agencies in facilitating and covering up organized crime. The revelations are shocking, and they challenge everything we thought we knew about the relationship between crime and law enforcement. It turns out that, in many cases, government agencies have been complicit in organized crime, either through direct involvement or through willful ignorance. This is perhaps best exemplified by the infamous Iran-Contra affair, in which the CIA was found to be involved in the trafficking of narcotics in order to fund anti-Sandinista rebels in Nicaragua. The implications are staggering, and they raise fundamental questions about the nature of power and the role of government in society. But as we delve deeper into this complex web of corruption, we begin to realize that the truth is far more nuanced and far more disturbing. As we navigate the treacherous landscape of crime and corruption, we find ourselves confronted with a dizzying array of contradictions and paradoxes. On the one hand, we have the dogged determination of law enforcement officials who risk their lives every day to bring criminals to justice. And on the other hand, we have the shocking revelations of corruption and the complicity of government agencies in organized crime. It's a complex and often confusing picture, and one that challenges our most deeply held assumptions about the world. But as we continue to follow the trail of clues and to delve deeper into the heart of darkness, we begin to uncover a hidden narrative, one that reveals the secret history of crime in all its complexity and all its horror. The more we learn, the more we realize that the truth is often hidden in plain sight, and that the most seemingly innocuous events can have far-reaching consequences. The story of the infamous 5 families of New York City is a case in point. On the surface, it appears to be a straightforward tale of organized crime with its attendant violence and corruption. But as we dig deeper, we find that the reality is far more complex and far more nuanced. The 5 families, it turns out, were not just simple crime syndicates, but rather complex organizations with their own rituals and their own codes of conduct. And at the heart of it all was the figure of Charles "Lucky" Luciano, the legendary mob boss who rose to power during the Prohibition era. Luciano's story is a fascinating one, full of twists and turns, and it reveals the intricate web of relationships that existed between organized crime and the political establishment. But as we explore the world of Luciano and the 5 families, we begin to realize that the truth is far more complicated and far more disturbing. The more we learn about the secret history of crime, the more we realize that it's a story that's still unfolding. The players may have changed, but the game remains the same. And as we look to the future, we're forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that the world of organized crime is still very much with us, and that its influence extends far beyond the shadows. The revelation is both shocking and sobering, and it challenges us to rethink our assumptions about the nature of crime and the role of government in society. But as we stand at the threshold of this new understanding, we're left with a haunting question. What other secrets lie hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered? The answer, much like the truth itself, remains elusive, but one thing is certain. The secret history of crime is a story that will continue to fascinate and to haunt us for generations to come. As we near the end of our journey into the heart of darkness, we're left with a profound sense of unease and a deepening awareness of the complexity and the nuance of the world around us. The Secret History of Crime is a story that's both captivating and terrifying, and it challenges us to confront the darkest aspects of human nature. And yet, despite the horror and the tragedy, there's a sense of hope and of resilience that emerges from the shadows. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there are always those who will stand against the forces of darkness and who will fight for justice and for the truth. The story of the Secret History of Crime is a testament to the power of the human spirit, and a reminder that the truth, no matter how difficult it may be to uncover, is always worth fighting for. But as we emerge from the shadows and back into the light, we're left with a haunting question. What's the true cost of our pursuit of justice, and what are the consequences of our actions? The answer, much like the truth itself, remains elusive, but one thing is certain. The secret history of crime will continue to haunt us and to fascinate us for generations to come. As we delve deeper into the labyrinthine world of crime, it becomes increasingly clear that the pursuit of justice is often a double-edged sword. On one hand, the conviction of a perpetrator can bring closure to the victims and their families. But on the other, it can also lead to a false sense of security, allowing the underlying societal issues that contributed to the crime to go unaddressed. This dichotomy is perhaps most starkly illustrated in the case of the Innocence Project, which has exonerated hundreds of wrongfully convicted individuals in the United States alone, raising disturbing questions about the reliability of our justice system. But that wasn't the only concerning trend to emerge from these cases. A closer examination of the exonerations reveals a disturbing pattern of prosecutorial misconduct, faulty forensic evidence, and coerced confessions, all of which have contributed to the wrongful conviction of innocent people. The consequences of these mistakes are devastating, not only for the individuals who have been wrongly accused, but also for the families of the true victims who are left without justice or closure. Furthermore, the financial costs of these errors are staggering, with some estimates suggesting that the United States spends billions of dollars annually on incarcerating innocent people. But what's even more alarming is that these cases may just be the tip of the iceberg, as many more may remain undiscovered due to a lack of resources or access to DNA evidence. The use of DNA evidence, in fact, has been a game changer in the field of forensic science, allowing investigators to solve crimes that would have otherwise gone cold. However, the increasing reliance on this technology has also raised important questions about privacy and the potential for abuse. In the United States, for example, law enforcement agencies have been known to collect and store DNA samples from individuals who have not been convicted of a crime, raising concerns about the erosion of civil liberties. But that's not the only controversy surrounding DNA evidence. The practice of genetic genealogy, which involves using commercial DNA databases to identify suspects, has also sparked heated debates about the balance between public safety and individual privacy. As we navigate the complex landscape of crime and justice, it becomes clear that the lines between right and wrong are often blurred. Take, for instance, the case of the Golden State Killer, who was apprehended in 2018 after decades of evading capture. The use of genetic genealogy in this case was hailed as a major breakthrough, but it also raised important questions about the ethics of using this technology to identify suspects. The fact that the killer was ultimately caught using a public DNA database has sparked a renewed debate about the role of private companies in facilitating law enforcement investigations. But what's even more intriguing is that this case may have unintended consequences, as it has set a precedent for the use of genetic genealogy in other investigations, potentially opening up a Pandora's box of privacy concerns. The intersection of technology and crime is a rapidly evolving field, with new tools and techniques being developed all the time. One of the most significant advancements in recent years has been the use of artificial intelligence in crime scene analysis. AI-powered software can now be used to enhance forensic evidence, identify patterns, and even predict the likelihood of recidivism. However, as with any new technology, there are also concerns about bias and accuracy. If the data used to train these algorithms is flawed or incomplete, it can lead to misleading results, which can have serious consequences in the courtroom. But that's not the only challenge facing law enforcement agencies as they seek to leverage technology to combat crime. As we look to the future, it's clear that the secret history of crime will continue to be shaped by the complex interplay between technology, society, and human nature. The rise of cybercrime, for example, has created new opportunities for criminals to exploit vulnerabilities and commit crimes that were previously unimaginable. At the same time, it has also created new challenges for law enforcement agencies, which must now navigate a vast and rapidly evolving digital landscape in order to keep pace with these emerging threats. But what's even more pressing is that the future of crime prevention may depend on our ability to address the underlying social and economic issues that drive individuals to commit crimes in the first place. The relationship between poverty, inequality, and crime is complex, but one thing is clear. Unless we address these underlying issues, we will continue to see high rates of crime, regardless of how advanced our technology becomes. The consequences of failing to address these issues are far-reaching and devastating. Not only do high crime rates undermine public safety and trust in institutions, but they also have a corrosive effect on communities, perpetuating cycles of violence and trauma that can last for generations. The fact that many crimes are committed by individuals who have themselves been victims of trauma or abuse only serves to underscore the complexity of this issue. But that's not the only complication. The fact that our justice system is often ill-equipped to deal with the root causes of crime, instead focusing on punishment rather than rehabilitation, has led to a situation in which many offenders are released back into their communities without the support or resources they need to lead law-abiding lives. As we consider the true cost of our pursuit of justice, it's clear that the financial burden is only part of the equation. The human cost, in terms of lives lost, families torn apart, and communities devastated, is immeasurable. And yet, despite these staggering costs, we continue to pursue a system of justice that prioritizes punishment over prevention and retribution over rehabilitation. But what if we were to take a different approach? What if we were to focus on addressing the underlying causes of crime rather than just its symptoms? The answer, much like the truth itself, remains elusive, but one thing is certain. The secret history of crime will continue to haunt us until we confront the darker aspects of our own nature and the societal ills that drive us to commit harm against one another. The search for answers, however, is an ongoing process, and one that requires a willingness to confront the complexities and nuances of the human experience. As we delve deeper into the secret history of crime, we are forced to confront the fact that our understanding of justice is often incomplete and that the truth is rarely black and white. But that's what makes this topic so fascinating and so worthy of exploration. The fact that we can learn from the past and use that knowledge to build a better future is a powerful reminder of the importance of this work. But what's even more compelling is that the story of crime and justice is still being written, and that we all have a role to play in shaping its outcome. The question is, what will we do with this knowledge, and how will we use it to create a more just and equitable society? As we delve deeper into the complexities of crime and justice, it becomes increasingly clear that the narrative is far from straightforward. On one hand, advances in technology have enabled law enforcement to crack cases that would have otherwise gone cold, such as the Golden State Killer, whose identity was finally revealed in 2018 after decades of investigation, thanks to the use of genetic genealogy. But on the other hand, this same technology has also raised concerns about privacy and the potential for misuse, highlighting the delicate balance between security and individual rights. The question remains, how can we harness the power of technology to combat crime without compromising our fundamental freedoms? The use of DNA profiling, for instance, has been a game changer in solving crimes, but it also raises important questions about the storage and protection of genetic data. In the United States, the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, contains the DNA profiles of over 14 million offenders, but the database is not without its flaws. For example, a study by the National Institute of Justice found that the accuracy of DNA testing can be compromised by contamination, human error, and inadequate quality control. But that wasn't the only issue, as the use of DNA profiling has also sparked debates about racial bias and the disproportionate representation of minority groups in the database. As we navigate this complex landscape, it's essential to consider the potential consequences of our actions and how they may impact marginalized communities. One of the most significant challenges in addressing crime is the issue of recidivism, with many offenders returning to a life of crime after being released from prison. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, over 76% of prisoners released in 2014 were arrested again within 5 years. This staggering statistic highlights the need for effective rehabilitation programs and support services to help offenders reintegrate into society. However, the implementation of such programs is often hindered by funding constraints, bureaucratic red tape, and a lack of political will. But what if we told you that there's a country that has managed to buck this trend, with recidivism rates significantly lower than the international average? The story of Norway's approach to prison reform is a fascinating one, and it's a tale that challenges many of our assumptions about crime and punishment. In Norway, the emphasis is on rehabilitation rather than punishment, with prisoners given access to education, job training, and counseling. The results are nothing short of remarkable, with recidivism rates plummeting to just 20%. But what's behind this success story? Is it the focus on restorative justice, which prioritizes repairing the harm caused by crime rather than simply punishing the offender? Or is it the emphasis on creating a sense of community and social responsibility among prisoners? Whatever the reason, it's clear that Norway's approach has yielded impressive results, and it's an example that warrants closer examination. But that's not the only surprising aspect of Norway's justice system, as the country has also been at the forefront of experimenting with new technologies to reduce crime. The use of artificial intelligence, for instance, is being explored as a means of predicting and preventing crime. In Oslo, the police have been using AI-powered systems to analyze crime patterns and identify high-risk areas. The results have been promising, with crime rates decreasing in targeted neighborhoods. But as we consider the potential benefits of this technology, we must also acknowledge the risks of relying on algorithms to make decisions about law enforcement. What if the data used to train these systems is biased or incomplete? Could we be inadvertently perpetuating existing social inequalities, rather than addressing the root causes of crime? These are the kinds of questions that we must grapple with as we move forward, and it's essential that we do so in a transparent and accountable manner. As we continue to navigate the complex landscape of crime and justice, it's essential to recognize that there are no easy answers. The issues we're dealing with are deeply ingrained, and they require a nuanced and multifaceted approach. But one thing is certain: we cannot afford to simply maintain the status quo. The human cost of crime is too high, and the economic burden is too great. We need to be willing to challenge our assumptions, to experiment with new approaches, and to learn from our mistakes. And as we do so, we must also acknowledge the importance of community engagement and participation in the justice system. After all, it's the people who are most affected by crime who often have the most to offer in terms of solutions. But what happens when the community itself is divided and there are competing visions for what justice should look like? In the city of Chicago, for example, the debate over policing and crime has been highly polarized, with some arguing that the police need more resources and others advocating for radical reforms. The situation is further complicated by the fact that Chicago has one of the highest homicide rates in the United States, with over 700 murders in 2020 alone. As we consider the different perspectives on this issue, it's clear that there are no simple solutions, and that any approach will require a deep understanding of the complex social and economic factors at play. But that's what makes this story so compelling, as it's a microcosm of the broader challenges we're facing in the fight against crime. And as we move closer to the end of our journey, it's essential that we keep our eyes on the prize, and that we remain committed to creating a more just and equitable society for all. The interplay between crime and social inequality is a critical aspect of this narrative, as it's clear that those who are most disadvantaged are often the ones who are most vulnerable to crime. In the United States, for instance, the poverty rate for African Americans is more than twice that of white Americans, and this disparity has a direct impact on crime rates. According to the FBI, in 2020, African Americans made up about 13% of the population, but accounted for more than 26% of all arrests. These statistics are a stark reminder of the systemic inequalities that underpin our society, and they highlight the need for a more nuanced approach to addressing crime. But what if we told you that there's a city that has managed to reduce its crime rate by over 50% in just a few years, and that the key to this success lies in a radical new approach to community policing? The city of Oakland, California, has been at the forefront of this movement, with a focus on building trust between law enforcement and the community. The results have been remarkable, with homicides decreasing by over 50% between 2012 and 2019. But what's behind this success story? Is it the emphasis on de-escalation training, which teaches officers how to resolve conflicts without resorting to violence? Or is it the creation of community-led initiatives, which empower local residents to take ownership of their neighborhoods? Whatever the reason, it's clear that Oakland's approach has yielded impressive results, and it's an example that warrants closer examination. But as we consider the potential of this approach, we must also acknowledge the challenges of scaling it up and the need for a more systemic transformation of our justice system. As we near the end of our journey, it's essential that we reflect on the lessons we've learned and that we consider the implications of our findings. The story of crime and justice is complex and multifaceted, and it's clear that there are no easy solutions. But what's also clear is that we have a unique opportunity to shape the future of this narrative and to create a more just and equitable society for all. The question is, what will we do with this knowledge, and how will we use it to drive positive change? The answer, much like the story of crime itself, is still being written, and it's up to us to determine the outcome. But one thing is certain: the future of crime and justice will be shaped by the choices we make today, and it's essential that we approach this challenge with courage, compassion, and a commitment to creating a better world for all. As we consider the future of crime and justice, it's essential to examine the role of technology in shaping this landscape. The advent of artificial intelligence, biometrics, and data analytics has transformed the way law enforcement agencies approach crime prevention and investigation. However, this increased reliance on technology also raises important questions about privacy, bias, and accountability. For instance, the use of facial recognition software has been shown to be less accurate for people of color, potentially leading to wrongful arrests and convictions. But that wasn't the only concern, as the collection and storage of biometric data also pose significant risks to individual privacy and security. The complexities of this issue are further compounded by the fact that many law enforcement agencies are now partnering with private companies to develop and implement these technologies. This has created a multi-billion-dollar industry, with companies like Palantir and Clearview AI playing a significant role in shaping the future of law enforcement. However, the lack of transparency and oversight in these partnerships has raised concerns about the potential for abuse and the erosion of civil liberties. As we delve deeper into this issue, it becomes clear that the line between public safety and corporate interests is increasingly blurred. But what's even more troubling is the fact that some of these companies are now pushing for the use of predictive policing algorithms, which can potentially perpetuate existing biases and disparities in the justice system. The use of predictive policing algorithms is a prime example of how technology can exacerbate existing social problems. By analyzing historical crime data, these algorithms can identify high crime areas and predict where future crimes are likely to occur. However, this approach has been criticized for perpetuating a cycle of over-policing in marginalized communities, leading to increased arrests and convictions for minor offenses. Furthermore, the use of these algorithms can also create a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the predicted outcomes become a reality due to the increased police presence and surveillance. But that's not the only way in which technology is being used to predict and prevent crime. Some companies are now developing AI-powered systems that can analyze social media activity and identify potential criminals before they commit a crime. The idea of using social media activity to predict criminal behavior may seem like the stuff of science fiction, but it's a reality that's already being explored by law enforcement agencies around the world. For instance, the Chicago Police Department has been using a system called the Heat List to identify individuals who are at risk of being involved in a shooting. The system uses a combination of factors, including social media activity, arrest history, and gang affiliations, to predict an individual's likelihood of being involved in a violent crime. However, the use of such systems raises important questions about privacy, free speech, and the potential for abuse. As we consider the implications of this technology, it's essential to ask whether the ends justify the means. But what's even more concerning is the fact that some of these systems are now being used to target specific communities and demographics, potentially perpetuating existing biases and disparities. The targeting of specific communities and demographics is a critical issue that must be addressed as we move forward. The use of technology to predict and prevent crime must be balanced against the need to protect individual rights and freedoms. This is particularly important in communities that have historically been marginalized and over-policed. As we consider the future of crime and justice, it's essential to prioritize transparency, accountability, and community engagement. But as we delve deeper into this issue, it becomes clear that the stakes are much higher than we initially thought. The use of technology to shape the future of crime and justice is not just a domestic issue, but a global one, with implications for international relations, human rights, and global security. The global implications of this issue are far-reaching and complex. As countries around the world grapple with the challenges of crime and justice, they are increasingly looking to technology as a solution. However, this has created a new landscape of global surveillance and control, with companies like Huawei and Hikvision playing a significant role in shaping the future of law enforcement. But as we consider the implications of this trend, it's essential to ask whether we are creating a more just and equitable world or simply perpetuating existing power dynamics. The answer to this question is not a simple one, and it will require a nuanced and multifaceted approach to address the complex issues at play. But one thing is certain: the future of crime and justice will be shaped by the choices we make today, and it's essential that we approach this challenge with a critical and informed perspective. As we move forward, it's essential to consider the potential risks and unintended consequences of our actions. The use of technology to predict and prevent crime may seem like a panacea, but it's a solution that is fraught with complexity and uncertainty. As we weigh the potential benefits against the potential risks, it's essential to prioritize transparency, accountability, and community engagement. But as we delve deeper into this issue, it becomes clear that the stakes are much higher than we initially thought. The future of crime and justice is not just a domestic issue, but a global one with implications for international relations, human rights, and global security. And as we consider the potential consequences of our actions, we must ask ourselves, what happens when the very systems designed to protect us become the greatest threat to our freedom and security? As we delve deeper into the intricacies of the global crime landscape, it becomes increasingly evident that the lines between national security and individual freedom are becoming increasingly blurred. Governments around the world are investing heavily in surveillance technologies, citing the need to combat terrorism and organized crime. However, this escalation in surveillance capabilities has also led to a significant increase in the potential for abuse of power, with many arguing that the ends do not justify the means. The case of Edward Snowden, who revealed the extent of the NSA's global surveillance program, is a prime example of the tension between national security and individual privacy. But that wasn't the only instance of government overreach. In recent years, there have been numerous reports of law enforcement agencies using advanced technologies, such as facial recognition software and cell phone tracking devices, to monitor and track individuals without their knowledge or consent. This raises important questions about the balance between public safety and individual liberty, and whether the use of such technologies is truly necessary to prevent crime. Furthermore, the fact that many of these technologies are being developed and marketed by private companies has led to concerns about the role of corporate interests in shaping the global crime agenda. As we consider the implications of this trend, we must ask ourselves, what happens when the pursuit of security becomes a lucrative business and the interests of corporations and governments become increasingly intertwined? The use of private security contractors is another area where the lines between public and private interests are becoming increasingly blurred. In many parts of the world, private security companies are being hired to provide services that were previously the exclusive domain of government agencies. This has led to a proliferation of private military companies, which are often operating in a legal gray area, with little oversight or accountability. The case of Blackwater, a private security company that was implicated in the killing of civilians in Iraq, is a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked private power. But what's even more disturbing is the fact that many of these companies are now being hired by governments to provide training and support to local law enforcement agencies, raising questions about the potential for human rights abuses and the erosion of democratic accountability. As we examine the complex web of relationships between governments, corporations, and private security companies, it becomes clear that the global crime landscape is characterized by a high degree of complexity and opacity. The use of shell companies, tax havens, and other financial secrecy mechanisms has made it increasingly difficult to track the flow of money and resources, and to identify the individuals and organizations that are driving the global crime agenda. But that's not the only challenge. The fact that many of these activities are taking place in jurisdictions with weak or corrupt governance structures has created a culture of impunity, where those who engage in criminal activity are able to operate with relative freedom. The case of the Panama Papers, which revealed the extent of global tax evasion and money laundering, is a prime example of the scale and scope of this problem. The implications of this are far-reaching and have significant consequences for our understanding of the global crime landscape. As we consider the role of corruption and financial secrecy in facilitating criminal activity, we must also examine the ways in which these phenomena are linked to broader issues of economic inequality and social injustice. The fact that many of the individuals and companies involved in these activities are able to operate with relative impunity, while others are subject to harsh penalties and strict enforcement, raises important questions about the fairness and equity of the global justice system. But what's even more disturbing is the fact that many of these activities are being facilitated by the very same governments and institutions that are supposed to be combating crime. The case of the HSBC Bank, which was fined billions of dollars for laundering money for Mexican drug cartels, is a stark reminder of the ways in which the global financial system can be used to facilitate criminal activity. As we delve deeper into the world of global crime, it becomes increasingly evident that the stakes are much higher than we initially thought. The fact that many of the individuals and organizations involved in these activities are able to operate with relative impunity, and that the consequences of their actions are felt by millions of people around the world, raises important questions about the effectiveness of our current approaches to combating crime. The use of traditional law enforcement methods, such as arrests and prosecutions, may not be sufficient to address the scale and complexity of the problem. Instead, we may need to think more creatively about how to disrupt and dismantle the global crime networks, and how to create a more just and equitable society that is less vulnerable to exploitation. But that's not the only challenge. The fact that many of these activities are taking place in a global context, where the rule of law is often weak or absent, raises important questions about the role of international cooperation and diplomacy in combating crime. The role of international organizations, such as the United Nations and the European Union, is critical in this regard. These organizations have the power to shape global policies and standards, and to provide support and resources to countries that are struggling to combat crime. However, the fact that many of these organizations are also subject to the influence of powerful governments and corporations raises important questions about their independence and effectiveness. The case of the UN's Office on Drugs and Crime, which has been criticized for its close ties to the U.S. government, is a prime example of the challenges of navigating these complex relationships. But what's even more disturbing is the fact that many of these organizations are also being used to promote a narrow and punitive approach to crime, which prioritizes enforcement and punishment over prevention and rehabilitation. As we consider the implications of this trend, we must ask ourselves, what happens when the global crime agenda is shaped by the interests of powerful governments and corporations, rather than the needs and rights of ordinary people? The fact that many of the individuals and communities that are most affected by crime are also the ones that are least represented in these global forums raises important questions about the fairness and equity of the system. The case of the war on drugs, which has been widely criticized for its disproportionate impact on minority communities, is a stark reminder of the dangers of a one-size-fits-all approach to crime. But that's not the only challenge. The fact that many of these activities are taking place in a context of deepening economic inequality and social injustice raises important questions about the root causes of crime and the ways in which we can address them. The relationship between crime and inequality is complex and multifaceted and cannot be reduced to simple or simplistic explanations. However, it is clear that the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few individuals and corporations has created a culture of exploitation and dispossession, which has far-reaching consequences for our understanding of the global crime landscape. The fact that many of the individuals and communities that are most affected by crime are also the ones that are least able to access the resources and support they need to rebuild their lives raises important questions about the fairness and equity of the system. But what's even more disturbing is the fact that many of these activities are being facilitated by the very same governments and institutions that are supposed to be combating crime. The case of the global financial crisis, which was caused in part by the reckless and irresponsible behavior of wealthy elites, is a stark reminder of the ways in which the pursuit of profit can lead to devastating consequences for ordinary people. As we consider the implications of this trend, we must ask ourselves, what happens when the global crime agenda is shaped by the interests of the wealthy and powerful, rather than the needs and rights of ordinary people? The fact that many of the individuals and communities that are most affected by crime are also the ones that are least represented in these global forums raises important questions about the fairness and equity of the system. The case of the Occupy Wall Street movement, which highlighted the deepening economic inequality and social injustice in the United States, is a prime example of the ways in which ordinary people can come together to challenge the status quo and demand change. But that's not the only challenge. The fact that many of these activities are taking place in a context of deepening political polarization and social division raises important questions about the ways in which we can build a more just and equitable society, and the role that ordinary people can play in shaping the global crime agenda. The role of civil society and social movements is critical in this regard. These organizations have the power to mobilize public opinion and to push for policy changes that prioritize the needs and rights of ordinary people. However, the fact that many of these organizations are also subject to the influence of powerful governments and corporations raises important questions about their independence and effectiveness. The case of the Arab Spring, which was facilitated in part by the use of social media and other digital technologies, is a prime example of the ways in which ordinary people can come together to challenge the status quo and demand change. But what's even more disturbing is the fact that many of these activities are being monitored and suppressed by governments and corporations, which are using advanced technologies to track and disrupt the activities of social movements and civil society organizations. As we consider the implications of this trend, we must ask ourselves, what happens when the global crime agenda is shaped by the interests of powerful governments and corporations, rather than the needs and rights of ordinary people? The fact that many of the individuals and communities that are most affected by crime are also the ones that are least represented in these global forums raises important questions about the fairness and equity of the system. The case of the Snowden revelations, which highlighted the extent of global surveillance and the erosion of civil liberties, is a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of protecting the rights and freedoms of ordinary people. But that's not the only challenge. The fact that many of these activities are taking place in a context of deepening economic inequality and social injustice raises important questions about the root causes of crime and the ways in which we can address them. The relationship between crime and inequality is complex and multifaceted and cannot be reduced to simple or simplistic explanations. However, it is clear that the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few individuals and corporations has created a culture of exploitation and dispossession, which has far-reaching consequences for our understanding of the global crime landscape. The fact that many of the individuals and communities that are most affected by crime are also the ones that are least able to access the resources and support they need to rebuild their lives raises important questions about the fairness and equity of the system. But what's even more disturbing is the fact that many of these activities are being facilitated by the very same governments and institutions that are supposed to be combating crime. The case of the global tax avoidance industry, which has been estimated to cost governments billions of dollars in lost revenue, is a stark reminder of the ways in which the pursuit of profit can lead to devastating consequences for ordinary people. As we consider the implications of this trend, we must ask ourselves, what happens when the global crime agenda is shaped by the interests of the wealthy and powerful, rather than the needs and rights of ordinary people? The fact that many of the individuals and communities that are most affected by crime are also the ones that are least represented in these global forums raises important questions about the fairness and equity of the system. The case of the global movement for Black lives, which has highlighted the deepening racial inequality and social injustice in the United States, is a prime example of the ways in which ordinary people can come together to challenge the status quo and demand change. But that's not the only challenge. The fact that many of these activities are taking place in a context of deepening political polarization and social division raises important questions about the ways in which we can build a more just and equitable society, and the role that ordinary people can play in shaping the global crime agenda. The role of education and awareness is critical in this regard. By educating ourselves and others about the complexities of the global crime landscape, we can begin to build a more nuanced and informed understanding of the issues and to develop more effective strategies for addressing them. However, the fact that many of the individuals and communities that are most affected by crime are also the ones that are least able to access the resources and support they need to rebuild their lives raises important questions about the fairness and equity of the system. The case of the global refugee crisis, which has highlighted the deepening humanitarian crisis and social injustice in many parts of the world, is a stark reminder of the ways in which the pursuit of profit and power can lead to devastating consequences for ordinary people. But what's even more disturbing is the fact that many of these activities are being facilitated by the very same governments and institutions that are supposed to be combating crime. As we consider the implications of this trend, we must ask ourselves, what happens when the global crime agenda is shaped by the interests of powerful governments and corporations, rather than the needs and rights of ordinary people? The fact that many of the individuals and communities that are most affected by crime are also the ones that are least represented in these global forums raises important questions about the fairness and equity of the system. The case of the global movement for climate justice, which has highlighted the deepening environmental crisis and social injustice in many parts of the world, is a prime example of the ways in which ordinary people can come together to challenge the status quo and demand change. But that's not the only challenge. The fact that many of these activities are taking place in a context of deepening economic inequality and social injustice raises important questions about the root causes of crime and the ways in which we can address them.